The city of Seoul was a symphony of motion, a sprawling, glittering jewel that never seemed to sleep. For Nia, who had just stepped off a long flight from America, it was a world both thrilling and overwhelming. The neon signs blazed with characters she couldn't read. The speedy subway cars whispered past, and the orderly crowds moved with a purpose she could only guess at. She was here for a dream, a one-year art teaching program that had felt like winning the lottery. Her small apartment provided by the program was cozy and filled with light, the perfect place to unpack her paints and her hopes. She missed her family, the familiar sounds of home. But the excitement of this new adventure was a powerful antidote to the occasional pain of loneliness. Her days quickly found a rhythm. Mornings spent learning basic Korean phrases, afternoons exploring the city's many palaces and markets with her sketchbook, and evenings planning the art lessons she would soon teach to children. She was building a new life. One brushstroke at a time, and she was happy. In a different part of the city, in a tall, sleek building that seemed to scrape the sky, lived a man whose world was the exact opposite of Nia's bright new beginning. His name was Heir, and his life was one of quiet control and heavy responsibility. He was the head of a vast family business, an organization that operated in the shadows, its power built on a history of rules, loyalty, and unspoken threats. From his spotless modern office, he commanded respect and more often fear. He wore expensive dark suits that fit him perfectly, and his face was often a mask of cool indifference. But behind that mask was a deep and growing worry. His family, his council of uncles and advisors, was pressuring him. The future of their legacy, they insisted, depended on him producing an heir, a son to whom he could one day pass the mantle of his complicated empire. To them, it was a simple matter of duty. To Heir, it felt like a cage. The idea of finding a wife in his own dangerous world, of bringing a child into it through a cold, arranged marriage, filled him with a profound sense of loneliness. He didn't want a partner born from his world's darkness. He craved someone who represented the light he never had. One afternoon, a rare moment of quiet found Heir being driven through a less busy part of the city. He was looking over a report, his brow furrowed, when a splash of color in a small public park caught his eye. He told his driver to stop. There, sitting on a bench with a large sketchbook propped on her knees, was a young woman. She had dark, beautiful skin, and her hair was a crown of soft, tight curls. She was completely absorbed in her drawing, her tongue peeking out slightly in concentration. He watched as she looked up at a bed of vibrant pink flowers, then back down at her paper, her hand moving with swift, confident strokes. What struck him most was the expression on her face, a pure, unguarded joy. It was a look he never saw in his own circles, a look untouched by greed or fear. For 10 full minutes, he sat in the silence of his car, watching her create her little world of beauty in the middle of the bustling city. He felt a strange pull, an ache for the simplicity and warmth she seemed to embody. He didn't know her name, but in that moment, he saw a possible solution to his problem that was as radical as it was simple. The sky, which had been a clear blue, suddenly turned gray. Thick, heavy drops of rain began to fall, quickly becoming a downpour. Heir saw the woman Nia gasp and scrambled to gather her art supplies, trying to shield her sketchbook from the rain with her body. It was a hopeless effort. Without overthinking, Heir stepped out of his car. He walked over to her, holding his own umbrella high so it covered her. "You will ruin your work," he said, his voice deeper and calmer than she expected. Startled, Nia looked up into the face of a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine, all sharp lines and serious eyes. He guided her without waiting for an answer to the back seat of his waiting car. She was too surprised and too wet to protest. Inside the car, the world went quiet. The drumming of the rain on the roof was the only sound. Nia hugged her damp sketchbook to her chest, feeling both grateful and nervous. "Thank you," she said softly. "I wasn't expecting the rain." Kyungi simply nodded, his gaze intense as he looked at her. He asked her name and what she was doing in Seoul. Her voice, as she spoke about her art teaching program, was warm and melodic. He learned she was here alone, building a new life far from home. It only confirmed the idea that was forming in his mind. He was a man who assessed risks and opportunities for a living, and he decided to take the biggest gamble of his life. He spoke plainly, laying out the truth of his situation. He explained the pressure he was under from his traditional family. He told her he needed an heir. He did not offer her flowers or false promises of romance. Instead, he offered a bargain. He promised her a life of complete financial security. She would want for nothing, a beautiful home, anything her heart desired. In return, she would agree to be his partner in this specific goal. He would protect her, cherish her as the mother of his child, and ensure she was always safe. Our lives would become joined, he said, his eyes locked with hers. I will fit my world into yours, and together we can build a new future. No was utterly stunned. Her mind raced. This was insane. It was dangerous. He was a stranger, a powerful, intimidating man with a mysterious business, asking her for the most personal thing a person could give. She should say no. She should open the car door and run back into the rain. But as she looked at him, she didn't see a monster. She saw the same loneliness she sometimes felt in her own small apartment, magnified 1,000 times by the weight of his responsibility. She saw a stark honesty in his proposal, a brutal clarity that was somehow more respectful than a sweet tonged lie. He wasn't pretending this was a fairy tale. He was offering a partnership, a merger of two lonely lives for a shared purpose. The security he offered was a powerful lure for a woman alone in a foreign country. But more than that, she was undeniably drawn to him, to his strength and his surprising vulnerability. After a long silence, her heart pounding in her ears, she took a deep breath. Okay, she whispered, her voice trembling but clear. I'll do it. The car moved through the rain-slick streets, carrying them both toward a future that was as uncertain as it was inevitable. The transition into high was as seamless and quiet as the opening of a heavy soundproof door. Nia's small sunlit apartment was exchanged for a residence that felt more like a modern art museum than a home. The spaces were vast, filled with expensive minimalist furniture that held no personal history, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, yet distant view of the Seoul skyline. Everything was perfect, sterile, and utterly silent. For the first few weeks, they coexisted like two carefully orbiting planets, their paths crossing only at predetermined points. They shared meals at the long-polished dining table, the clink of silverware against fine china, the only conversation. Hyeon-ki was always polite, inquiring if she needed anything, if the chef was preparing food to her liking, if the driver knew the way to her new art studio. His generosity was boundless, but it was the generosity of a benefactor, not a partner. He provided everything except the one thing she found herself increasingly craving, a genuine connection. Nia, however, was not one to live in a gilded cage quietly. She began slowly and subtly to leave her mark on the cold perfection of the house. A vibrant abstract painting she had finished, a swirl of gold and crimson that reflected her own inner fire, appeared on a one-spare wall in the living room. A cozy, thick-knit blanket in a deep purple hue was draped over the austere gray sofa. A small, laughable collection of quirky mugs she had collected from a local market began to appear in the kitchen cabinet, replacing the uniform white porcelain. Yanni noticed each change. He would walk through a room and stop, his eyes lingering on the new splash of color. He never commented, but he didn't have anything removed. It was as if he was watching a slow-moving sunrise, curious to see what light it would bring to his dark world. The first true crack in the wall between them appeared on a night when Hunky returned home unusually late. The stress of his work clung to him like a shadow, his shoulders tense, his jaw tight. The house was dark except for a soft light coming from the kitchen. He found Nia there, not waiting for him, but simply sitting at the island with a cup of tea, sketching in a small notebook. She looked up and seeing the deep weariness etched on his face, she wordlessly stood, filled the kettle, and prepared a second cup of the fragrant herbal tea she was drinking. She placed it before him on the counter. No questions, no demands, just a simple, quiet offering. He stared at the steaming cup for a long moment before wrapping his long fingers around its warmth. That simple, unasked for kindness in the deep silence of the night felt more intimate than any conversation they had yet shared. It was the first time he had allowed her to see a crack in his own armor, and the first time she had reached through it without being asked. After that night, a subtle shift occurred. Their polite small talk over dinner evolved into longer conversations. He began to ask about her art, not as a polite duty, but with genuine curiosity. He learned about the children she taught, their funny observations, and the joy she found in their creative discoveries. In turn, Nia learned to read the subtle signs of his mood, the slight relaxation of his posture when a problem at work was solved, the way he would sometimes pinch the bridge of his nose when his thoughts were heavy. She learned that his business, while intimidating, was built on a fierce, unwavering code of loyalty. He was not a reckless man. He was a strategic one, burdened by the weight of countless dependents. She saw the leader, but she was beginning to glimpse the man trapped inside. The physical space between them also began to close, measured in inches that felt like miles. It started with the accidental brush of hands as he held a car door open for her. A shared glance across a room that lasted a moment too long, charged with an unspoken understanding. One evening, as they walked through the private garden, Nia stumbled slightly on an uneven stone. Kyung's hand shot out, his grip firm on her elbow to steady her. He didn't let go immediately. His touch was warm and solid, and a jolt, both startling and pleasant, passed between them. They stood there for a heartbeat. The city's distant hum, their only soundtrack before he slowly, almost reluctantly released her. That single point of contact seemed to break a seal. Later that week, as they stood looking out at the city lights from the living room, he reached out and gently tucked a stray curl behind her ear, his knuckles barely grazing her cheek. The air grew thick and warm. Nia leaned into the touch, her eyes closing for a brief second. It was an invitation. Their first night of true intimacy was not the clinical execution of their bargain. It was a slow, tentative exploration. It was filled with hesitant touches and searching looks, a silent conversation of what was allowed, what was wanted. The spacious, cold bedroom was transformed by their shared warmth. The powerful, controlled Heir was replaced by a man who was surprisingly gentle, his touches full of irreverence that left her breathless. For Nia, it was not about fulfilling a contract. It was about connecting with the lonely man she had come to care for, about offering comfort and receiving it in return. It was in those quiet, dark hours that the last of their walls truly crumbled. They were no longer two people bound by a strange deal, but two souls finding solace in each other. The next morning, the dynamic in the house had irrevocably changed. The silence was no longer empty, but comfortable. The looks they exchanged were no longer polite, but soft and knowing. The bargain had brought them together, but it was this fragile, growing tenderness that was building a home. The change in their relationship was not announced with grand speeches or dramatic declarations, but seeped into the very foundation of their shared life like a gentle, persistent dawn. The house, once a symbol of cold luxury, now felt truly lived in. Laughter echoed where there was once only silence. Nia's art supplies claimed a permanent, cheerful corner of the living room, and Heir's serious business reports now sometimes shared table space with her sketchbooks and tubes of paint. He began coming home earlier, not out of duty, but out of a quiet yearning for the warmth she had created. Their evenings were no longer structured affairs, but comfortable stretches of time spent in each other's company. Her sketching while he read, her head eventually finding a resting place on his shoulder, his arm naturally wrapping around her. The bargain that had brought them together was now a distant memory, a ghost of a beginning overshadowed by the vibrant reality of their present. They were partners in every sense of the word, their initial arrangement having quietly, miraculously blossomed into a deep and abiding love. It was on a perfectly ordinary morning that the extraordinary happened. Nia, feeling unusually tired and a little off for several days, finally decided to take a test, her hands trembling slightly as she held the small plastic stick. When the result appeared, a clear and undeniable positive. A wave of such profound and complex emotion washed over her that she had to sit down. There was joy, sharp and brilliant, but it was intertwined with a sudden fierce protectiveness. This was no longer just about the fulfillment of a promise. This was about their child, a piece of both of them, a new life created from their unexpected love. When Hani returned home that evening, she met him at the door, the test held in her shaking hand. She didn't need to say a word. He looked from her tear-filled eyes to the test, and the formidable, controlled Mafia boss seemed to forget how to breathe. His face, for a single unguarded moment, was a canvas of pure, stunned wonder. Then he stepped forward and gathered her into an embrace so tight and full of feeling, it spoke more than 1,000 words ever could. He held her as if she were the most precious thing in his world, which he now realized she absolutely was. This newfound happiness, however, cast a long-shadowed eye in Hyani's world. Great joy was often seen as a vulnerability, a crack in the armor for enemies to exploit. An old rival, a man named Juno, who had long coveted heist territory, saw the news of his impending fatherhood not as a blessing, but as a strategic weakness. If he could not defeat Hai through direct force, he would target what he now cherished most. The threat began subtly, a car that seemed to follow Nia's driver a little too closely. A series of anonymous, menacing phone calls to the house that were always cut off before they could be traced. The protective walls Hungi had built around his life were being tested. He doubled her security, his demeanor turning cold and grim once more. But this time, the danger felt more personal, more terrifying than any business dispute. The fear was a constant cold knot in Nia's stomach, a stark reminder of the dark world her husband inhabited. The crisis culminated one rainy night. Nia was returning from her final art class before her maternity leave began. Her 2 bodyguards were vigilant, but Juno's men were clever, forcing their car into a secluded side street with a deliberate L-looking traffic accident. And the tense moments that followed as his men approached the vehicle, the world seemed to slow down for Hyani, who was monitoring everything from a command center in their home. His love for Nia, once a quiet, growing warmth, now burned with the ferocity of a supernova. It was no longer just about protection. It was about salvation. He mobilized every resource, every loyal soldier with a ruthless efficiency fueled by pure terror and love. He arrived on the scene himself, a storm of contained fury, his presence alone causing Juno's men to hesitate. The confrontation was swift and decisive. Kyunki made it abundantly clear that any threat to Nia and their child was a line that once crossed resulted in utter annihilation. That night, he didn't just defeat a rival. He forged a legend of his devotion that would echo through the underworld for years to come, ensuring no one would ever dare threaten his family again. In the profound quiet that followed the resolved danger, they stood together in the nursery Hyani had already begun to furnish. The room, painted a soft yellow, was a promise of the future. He turned to Nia, taking both of her hands in his. The usual authority in his voice was gone, replaced by a raw, vulnerable tenderness she had never heard before. Nia, he began, his voice thick with emotion. Our life together started with a business deal. I offered you security in exchange for an heir. But you gave me so much more. You gave me a home. You gave me your light. You showed me that my life could be about more than power and duty. It could be about love. He looked deep into her eyes, his own shining with unshed tears. I do not want you to stay because of our bargain. I want you to stay because you love me. I want you to be my wife, not in name, but in heart for all the days of my life. This is no longer a deal. This is a vow. I love you. Nia's heart felt so full she thought it might burst. She saw the entire journey in his eyes. The lonely man in the park, the stern bargainer, the gentle lover, and now the devoted protector, the loving father to be her future. The fears and dangers melted away, leaving only the certainty of what they had built together. There is no bargain anymore, Hyani, she whispered, her own tears finally falling. There is only us. There is only this love. Yes, I will stay with you forever. Their kiss was a seal on that promise, a gentle, loving connection that held the weight of all their past struggles and all their future joys. Their story had begun with a desperate proposal, but it would continue as a timeless tale of a love that was chosen, fought for, and won. A forever that was truly, deeply, and passionately their own. If you were moved by the journey of Nia and Ki from a lonely bargain to a love that conquered all, then you won't want to miss the stories that come next. Subscribe to the channel to join us for more unforgettable tales of romance, passion, and forever.